We've all saw the videos and heard the stories of giant trees. Giant in proportion, hard for us to imagine, apart from in movies such as Avatar that show. Now before I continue, just imagine the Earth as a circuit board, just as people such as myself and Michelle Gibson have spoke about in previous times. And that circuit board having particular points which we called nodes. And these nodes, just like on the human body in terms of acupuncture points, are key to the channeling of energy. And on these points of extreme energy, dual torus fields are created, and the best representation of that in a stable way is a tree, also represented in the human body among other things. I believe on these nodes, where trees have grown, they have grown in significant proportion due to the energy of that node. Whether trees exist on all these nodes is unknown. Some may argue they have been chopped down and replaced by man-made objects such as pyramids and castles, etc. Others would argue that trees do not exist on all of these nodes but only some. Having stated earlier that a tree is only one representation of the dual torus field, and it can be represented in many ways. Maybe having to have had the tree grow on the node or in very close proximity to that node. If not doing so, then the tree not growing in significant size and it highlighted in some other way, like stone circles or pyramids. What I would like to say is that a high majority of the main nodes are highlighted of once having or still having a tree of significance on that spot. If not a tree itself representing the energy of the torus field that is running through that particular node. But let's explore one of the most common features that appear on those nodes, being trees.
Do you remember when you were a child and everything was so magical? You would open up these fairy tales and you would hear of trees as tall as the sky. The forest as we know it today is not the forest that once existed. The sequoia, we have cut down so many trees. It's unbelievable. And now they live in museums. We go and visit them in national parks and we hug them as children do. Now they only live in our imagination. They are rare, few and far between. Devil's Tower. But take a closer look. Wait a minute. This is a tree stump. Can you see the resemblance? There are no accidents in this universe. Nature is far too intelligent for that.
This story is one that I believe and links into much more. Apart from the mother tree, said to be the Axis Mundi, I believe there were many more trees of importance, of significance, all over, highlighted to us today by the names of places and other markers such as buildings or monuments, often these being named after trees themselves. Now, giant trees and the remains are one thing, but what did the trees do? A worldwide network connected by this natural technology, if you like. Ley lines and the trees hugely connected, if not one. The leys almost being routes for this energy to travel. The tree itself connecting the energy to the grid. Like we see with any magnetic or any energy field, the energy reaches both below and above, also spreading horizontally, creating its field, whose core connects to other tree cores. Unlike the trees of today, these were massive in scale and size, meaning their power was more powerful than the trees of today. Their power essentially coming from being connected, especially with the mother tree. I have a theory that at these places where giant trees have been chopped down, there has been extensive mining. We are told the mining was for resources such as coal, gems and fuels of all types. What if the truth is that these elements were once living organisms that have been petrified, either part of the tree such as the fruit, if not other living organisms, along with the tree mined for its resource. This is a video by Slaughterhouse Productions that emphasises all gems such as diamonds are made rare via perception. The special element increases their value. Diamonds that are said to be found in rocks are actually found in petrified tree remains. The only reason diamonds are found in coal mines is that they are a product of a tree, which is the original form of coal. The trees produce tree resin. Could it be that rough diamonds are dried tree resins? Rough diamonds compared to a petrified tree slab. Rough resin compared to rough diamonds. Just as it takes time for grape juice to turn into wine, it also takes time for the resin to lose its cloudiness and have a clean appearance. But it is said this process is limited to just a few thousand years, not millions of years, and by particular events could be quickened. Since the place is called coal mines or the remains of ancient trees, the only thing you are going to find there are the biological remains of those trees. It goes on to explain that geodes are actually petrified fruits and other like things. It finalises by saying that these are a product of something else, almost like a transformation, as in the caterpillar turning into the butterfly, fruit hardening and turning into a hardened form, being the diamond or the gem, coal or other like substances. Interesting and taken into consideration. This video validated my original thoughts and feelings. And as a direct result of that, and also part of the overall aim, would be to disconnect that grid, which would ultimately confuse its inhabitants, the humans and animals alike, making them forget or fall. As the grid they were connected to, their home, they were no longer connected to. How all this was brought to my attention was my prior knowledge of lays and the trees, but also seeing where I live is dominated by the word elm, if not other trees. Noticing places, pubs, stadiums were all named after trees. But not just any trees, giant trees. The word elm is associated with death and dreaming in its mythology. The wood associated and used at one time was still for coffins. A variation of elm is witch elm. In folk tales was said to hold the power to give prophesied dreams. This reminds me of Nightmare on Elm Street, whose whole concept is about nightmares, who has the name Elm in its title. And outside the girl's house, in the first Elm Street, is a big tree. With this said, look at the magic in movies such as Willow, whose name is also associated with a tree. The traditional elm is said to be like a phoenix from the ashes, as the field elm has been able to recover from decimation due to its ability to grow easily. They were hugely decimated by a fungi that arrived in the UK in the 1960s, said to have killed 20 million trees. Just take a look at the tree names to see how widely used these names are in all things. From here we head to Google Earth, to my hometown where we start, and look at old maps and the locations of old mines and where possible trees once lay. I will also be discussing other discoveries I found just briefly along the way, such as how reservoirs and pools are also associated to mining. I bring you to a hill near where I live. Located on top of the hill is a church. And as you can see the indentation, below at the bottom of the hill, there's a shopping centre called the Meridians Centre. Now next to this hill, as you can see, it's surrounded by a canal and a reservoir. Down below the Meridians Centre, a massive shopping centre. The Meridians Centre on the old maps we will see was a mine. And I also find this structure kind of odd, the shape. This could have been something, unsure what that is, but as you can see by the landscape and the paths that the land makes, that this was something more. The church itself, St Andrew's, is located, as I stated, next to the Merry Hill Centre. Now the Merry Hill was a colliery, meaning it was a mine, and it was next to the Salt Walls Colliery, brickworks of all types, and as we can see where the Merry Hill Centre was a huge colliery. What were they digging? The Merry Hill Centre covers this whole entire area. Again, we find the odd shape next to it, which was nothing in particular. It seems to be a farm. But as we can see, the colliery was obviously digging something. They tell us coal. And again, the name of the place was Round Oak Works. It was referring to an oak, a giant oak. Now I suggest that the Merry Hill Centre was the location of a giant tree, which was dug and its resources took. As we proceed round the map, all we seem to find is shafts and collieries and mines and reservoirs. Now reservoirs are all next to either collieries or old shafts of some type. What I suggest reservoirs were old mines that were filled in with water. Now the water and the channels are also important, something I've been thinking about. The channels of the canal could well be the roots and the channels of the tree, which were dug out for the resources and then filled in. We suggest they're man-made, but are they? As you can see from the church in St Andrews and the old clay pit next to it, the old shafts, this was a huge mining area. Again, I believe the resources which they were mining, which was coal, is nothing more than resources of old trees. This whole area seems to be covered extensively with mine shafts. It was obviously a rich area for resources, meaning that it was a rich area in terms of the tree. We find places such as Bumble Hole next to Windmill End. Now Windmill itself is often a signifier of things. In the Bumble Hole we can see was a potential mine or shaft of some sort, which again has been filled in with water. As we approach Rowley Regis associated with king and royalty, we see a huge quarry, and again we see the remains of this quarry, which has been dug out. The place is referred to as Green, and other names refer to trees. Now the mine itself, the quarry, is next to two golf courses. The golf courses you can also see were quarries themselves. What I suggest from the Rowley quarry, you can almost see the shape the tree would make. I suggest that on top of Rowley Regis again was a huge tree which was mined, and the remains from above can almost be seen. We proceed round the area and find more collieries, and then a place called Cherry Orchard. A lot of these places, as I've already suggested, are referring to trees. Odd shapes and patterns, channels, part of a grid which they know about and we don't, or some of us. These locations often marked by either churches, collieries, parks, hospitals of today, and old buildings seem to be either workhouses or other type buildings also. We proceed to Mushroom Green, mushroom, again referring to greenery, the salt wells, and then we proceed to an area very close to myself called Cradley. Now the ley at the end of names is referring to ley lines and energy, if you knew or you didn't know. And it's located in a place which refers highly to the elms. Now it's a health centre. All elms seem to be promoting health, This is the location where I had my enlightenment, which is next to an old colliery and a church. A friend of mine found 2 ley lines running exactly through where the colliery used to be and where I had my enlightenment. We proceed and find orchards and a place called Two Gates, which is also referred to as the Broadstones, and you can see a clear line to where the Broadstones would be, the old pub, to where the park used to be. Broadstones are often referred to as rocks and megaliths of importance of power, highlighting places of power and significance. And I believe this place was one of them. But not just this place, all places. We proceed and we come to Witchbury Hill Camp. Now I believe this was an old fort, and Witchbury again refers to a tree. This old place has an obelisk, an old pit, it has a temple of Thesis, Elm Lodge, again referring to a tree, Thomas's Seat, the Prince's Pillar, Jacob's Well. The area today is a huge park, but this was an area of significance. You can see from the tree outline the shape of the old encampment, which is now hidden to the eye, right next to an obelisk. I believe this was a place of importance in times of past. Witchbury, which I've already referred to, was an important part of the Elm family. All locations such as golf courses and these parks seem to be covering up old mines or places of importance. As I've often said in old videos such as the parks video, when we visit parks we feel a sense of energy, peace, power. As the location of these trees, although resources took, the power is still there, but only faintly. We approach a place called Clent Hills, which has a massive elevation and is highlighted by places such as the Four Stones, again similar to obelisks, right next to Hagley Park, the park which I've just spoke about. I suggest the tree was either at Hagley Park or at Clent. Remember that not just the tree would hold resources, but also below the ground would be a huge reservoir of resources. Adams Hill in Clent. We find a place called the Holy Cross. The place names are telling us, like the lay at the end of names is telling you about a lay, a place of energy. Research the names and you will find the meanings. Again, a lot of these names are referring to trees. A nice little find in my area, there's a lot of places referring to Chaddersley Corbett, as Saint Chad was a big saint in my area. I take you to Birmingham, to Aston. Aston, name come from Astron, to do with a star. And I believe that at Aston, as you can see from the outlines, there was a star fort. The lines and the patterns that you see are made on purpose, surrounding Aston Hall, Aston Park. Which Aston Villa football ground is located right next to. From the position of the trees and the patterns, you can see shapes. The same energy grid would follow. Aston has a place now called Star City, again referring to the fort, the Star Fort. I believe Aston was part of a star fort, if not a star fort. That's why right next to it you get the fort and Star City. On the pictures, if you were to follow the lines and the paths, we would also find patterns. They seem to be sacred in terms of shape and geometry. Again, all these locations are next to churches. And if you notice, most parks are located either next to churches or schools, and all football grounds too. especially hospitals. There seems to be a hospital near a park in every case, almost like it's bleeding the energy from the park, using it somehow. We go from Aston through Ernington to a place called Sutton Coldfield, which is known as Royal Sutton Coldfield. I find it interesting how, similar to Rowley Regis, it has a royal association, and there is a history behind this. We find the electric light station placed within Sutton Coldfield, and again, a big park. In Sutton, we find a huge park with different reservoirs, and on some of the reservoirs, we can still see old shafts, hinting that the reservoirs were once used for something else. And the path systems, as you can see across the ground, just don't make sense either. The gravel pit that we see next to the baths are indications that they were once something else. Dugout spots. The whole scenario of mining in the past and the past itself is all a lie and covered up. Looking at old maps, we can find much. We find the Four Oaks. We find the Four Oaks Park near Ladywood and an encampment, again next to a lot of gravel pits. The symmetry of how the houses are lined up makes me believe again that it was a location of trees. The Oaklands. The peoples would have placed themselves in these locations around these trees to harness them, to harvest them. We don't seem to find many locations that haven't been mined. There's a whole underground system beneath our feet which we are unaware of. A subterranean system. In my town we have Dudley Castle, which I won't go to, but that is known to have extensive networks which is next to the canal. And the place where I live again in Birmingham and West Midlands has a huge link to a canal system. This item seems to have been there from the start till now. New Street Station seems to have been important, and again it is linked to the underground, appearing on all the old maps. Some of the only things that do are the big halls, the hospitals, which were once workhouses. Again, we find clay pits and brickworks of all types. A lot of the times on these old forts seems to have been built circuits of some type, race courses or... And one of the huge locations in Birmingham is the hospital. It sticks out from the air on any map. The extensity of these buildings is great. The old photos show the work was extensive, and they were all workhouses or insane asylums. The insane asylum turned into Winston Green's prison, and the workhouse turned into Birmingham Hospital. Still some of the biggest and most extensive buildings today. All the halls, mansions and houses that you see seem to have been there in past times. I just find it interesting looking around old maps, just seeing what was there in a previous time, and it's surprising what you can find. Interesting find in Quinton, the World's End. A lot of the old parks that we see were the location of fountains and springs, and are often next to golf courses that I've already pointed out. Still the subject of quarries, ponds and reservoirs in parks. Now before I leave you, let's switch to some more well-known places in England, such as Burton Dasset Hills, and look at the tree formation Windmills and buildings at the top of these hills seem to symbolise where the tree once would have stood. Just picture a tree at the top of the hill. And again, when we look at the old maps, it reveals much. I was surprised to see that it was actually the site of a quarry once again. A big quarry. Again, we see the name windmill. Windmill seems to represent places where trees once stood. Bonfire Hill, due to its height and location. Heading over to Derbyshire, to the R below, stone circles, a lot of ley lines seem to meet here. And here we find a lot of human remains, which would probably indicate some sort of war or battle. And again, old gravel pits, old quarries, clay pits and reservoirs, lead mines to indicate that digging was present once again. But it is quite surprising the amount of human remains that run alongside this, almost like it was being defended. Could stone circles be highlighting old tree locations of different variety in widths and scales? Avebury, England. The hill we just see as a hill. Most see it as a mound of some sort covering, but what if it was covering a tree trunk or part of that? Notice this was a place of importance also. Lots of remains and lots of stone circles, all hidden now. The town of Avebury itself being the remains of an old stone circle temple. Avebury, literally built within a stone circle. And we head over to Salisbury Hill in England, which again, if you just imagine the tree on top of the hill. And we look at the elevation of the hill, and we can almost again picture if a tree sat there, how perfectly it would sit. And the top just chopped off. Now when we go down into the old map, it shows an encampment, and again an old quarry around that encampment. These places were much more than what they tell us, and we can still feel the energy there regardless of the resources being drained. Notice all the stones situated as markers. Every place is important, some just more than others, due to the scale and size of what once stood there and the power that still radiates through that place. And before I leave, just a quick look down at Stonehenge. To notice the encampments and the old castles there. At Stonehenge and Glastonbury, we don't seem to see as much quarries or mines, but we do see a lot of stone circles and old world structures that are now hidden within fields, no one even knowing that they were there. And these places to the ancients were places of importance. Now to us, just sit in the middle of the field. trees of the past held much importance, and their power still radiates through the places where they once stood. Crystals, gems, and other type material seems to be substances from natural organisms such as trees, giant in proportion in most locations. And these locations still power points for energies, still connectable, still part of the grid. Find these places and use them. They may have been stripped, but they still hold value. You yourself are a beacon. Now, two useful sites for your own research would be the maps website, which I've shown you, which gives you overlays of all the maps accessible to yourself to see what was once there. The other one would be the megalith.co.uk site, which would show you any spring, well, megalith, any standing stone, all on one map for you to search your own locations. Love and peace.